Today's episode of the DevEd podcast is brought to you by Thinkster.io. With the rapid pace of change to front-end and back-end frameworks alike, stay up to date with your skills can be tough, but it doesn't have to be. With our expert-led courses on Thinkster.io, you have instant access to hundreds of awesome courses like our new curriculum on Vue.js and Nuxt by Erik Hanchett. You can even customize your learning path to include any combination of front-end and back-end technologies that are relevant to you. Thinkster.io, a better way to learn.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the DevEd podcast. My name is Joe Eames. I'll be your host. And today on our panel, we have Brooke Avery.
Hey, everybody.
Mike Dane.
Hey.
Sam the Man Julien.
Hey. Oh, I like that nickname. I'll take it.
Luis Hernandez.
Hola.
And as our very special guest, we have Erik Hanchett.
Hello.
Have you been on yet, Erik?
No.
All right. So first-time guests, we're going to need the following in this order. Bio, your background in programming, your dating profile, and now give us a little bit of background about who you are, what you've been doing, and we'll move on from there.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a software developer from Reno, Nevada. Full stack. I mostly focus on web development, and right now I'm working on Vue and Angular projects. I'm also an author of the Vue.js and Action book and the Ember.js Cookbook, published by Manning. And then I'm also kind of a side fun project that I do is I'm also a YouTuber, so do a lot of education on YouTube on web development and Vue.js.
As well as an awesome course on Thinkster.
Yes,
several.
and I'm also a Thinkster, course.
Yeah, if you head over to our review section, it's pretty much all Erik.
Well, no, you have...
we do have Hassan. Hassan has one course.
He's really good too.
Yeah. Hassan's a good guy. So today we're going to be talking about working remotely. We brought Erik on specifically because Erik has only ever worked remotely in his entire life. No, I'm sure that's not true. So we brought Erik on to kind of help round out the panel. I assume a lot of us have worked remotely. So this should be a fun discussion and discussing what it's like to work remotely, how it affects your work environment. We're going to talk about a lot of topics today, and also we're going to be talking about how it affects your learning. So let's start off with like kind of a basic question: why would you want to work remotely?
Well, I know for me that working remotely is pretty awesome. I admit it does have its downsides and its upsides, but being able to kind of work at your own pace, I can run to the other room to grab, make lunch, make food, I can just do whatever I want during the day, and everything's there. I don't have to worry about traveling to work. One of the reasons why is you get, I guess, freedom would be one of the reasons. You're a little bit more free with your schedule, and you don't have that commute. I think that's one of the reasons that people do it.
Panel, is he right or wrong?
I love that. Yeah, I think he's absolutely right. I'll put in another reason. I think one of the things I found just in working in office jobs is there tends to be a lot of downtime. So you might have like 15 or 20 minutes here, a half hour there where you're waiting for something or, just waiting in general. And I think a lot of times when you're in an office, you kind of have to act like you're working, or it has to seem like you're working. Whereas when you're at home, if you're not doing something, you can go do something else. Or if you're waiting for something, you can work on another project. So I think it's just more freedom with your time. You don't have to pretend that you're working so much, which I found that I end up having to do a lot in office jobs.
I've been in office jobs, open layouts where there's like cubicle after cubicle, and you can pop up and you can see everybody else's screen. Mm-hmm. Kind of feels like you have that forced sort of like conformity. Everybody needs to be working because we can all see each other's work, and everybody has headphones on. If you like a little more privacy, like I do, when you work from home, you definitely get that privacy. And by the way, I do like working remote. I'm sure we'll get into this, Joe, but there are some downsides too, of course.
Right. What else? Other benefits that we haven't mentioned so far?
Not having a commute is pretty sweet.
Not having a commute, yeah.
It's also better for the environment.
It's better for the environment. Better for the pocketbook, better for the environment. That's true.
I think being able to work from anywhere too, assuming you're in the right time zone, doesn't really matter, physically where you are as long as you have Wi-Fi. So I think that's another benefit.
I'm having a hard time jumping in because I can't explain why this is. But for me, I've noticed that since working from home, I've been a lot more self-directed. Like I get more done And again, I can't really explain why that is, because I was always on task and doing things when I worked in the office, but I don't know. It just seems like being a little bit more self-directed works with my personal personality. It gives me that freedom to feel like I can kind of choose what it is that I'm focusing on at a particular time. And I guess that's probably it. I think I just hit it right there. It's that I don't have to conform to a particular time schedule and someone else's agenda. I can still get done everything that's laid out before me, but I can get it done according to my own personal schedule. And I feel like it works for me. So I don't know. I feel like I actually get a lot more accomplished and I feel a lot more fulfilled by the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what was mentioned before of, being able to avoid the downtime in the office, but it also, I think it's also related to how people are different. So like I am a morning person. I don't mind getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and work, before everybody else comes to the office. And when you are in an office, it's harder to do that. Like I had a job where I had to work 9 to 6, and maybe, and this is for me, after like 4 o'clock, I'm not as productive as I am from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. So now working remotely, I flip that a little bit and I get up really early. So by 9 o'clock, I have had my best productive hours. Those 3 hours, I produce more than working from 4 to 8. So maybe that's what's going on with you. You can now take when you feel the most productive and focused, and then you deliver work right there, and it works a lot better than being forced into a schedule that is not jiving with your internal, body.
I would agree with that because I'm like you. I'm definitely a morning person, and I get a lot more done in the morning. And then by afternoon, I'm needing a bit of a break and a pause. But if you're in an office, you can't really do that. So it's just nice to be able to work around my own body clock. And yeah, I like what you said. Thank you, Luis.
I like the idea too of not having as many interruptions. I think that was mentioned. Like if you're in an office, I think I have worked in offices where I've sat next to, chatty Cathy's, and like somewhere around 2 or 3 o'clock, the noise in the office starts raising and it becomes harder to concentrate and to work. And sometimes just in the morning, like I work next to someone that every single morning around 9 o'clock, no matter what, they talked about, the latest episode of Game of Thrones or Mad Men or something like that. And it was like, I could tune it out, but I'm like, okay, it's just a little bit more interruptions. I mean, it's fine to talk, but definitely having a quiet environment helps. Quieter,
right? All right. So what about the drawbacks of working remotely?
You have to have some sort of focus. Like you definitely can get off rails really quickly. Start looking through YouTube videos you could do that at work too, but I think with a little less social pressure, you can kind of go off the rails. It's kind of a little bit lonely. People sometimes talk about like working from home. You don't see those coworkers and you start missing that after a few weeks if not talking to anyone, or if you're just on Slack only. I think the modern workplace, everybody's on Slack. Then you don't get that human interaction that you would normally just working with other people.
I've also found too, it's like, it can be hard to stop. Like a lot of times if I'm working remote, I'll be working on, like a PR or something, and I'm just like in the zone of doing it. And then, 4 or 5 o'clock comes around where I'm supposed to stop, but I'm like, oh, it's not like I have to drive home or anything. I'll just keep working on this. And then I'll end up working on it for like 3 or 4 extra hours. So I think sometimes, if you have a commute, it's easier to bookend your day. Whereas if you're just working from home, it's harder to kind of separate the work from the normal life because it's the same environment. So I've struggled with that in the past.
Yeah, you definitely have to define your boundaries better when you are working remote. I definitely am the tendency to try to work too much or be thinking about working all the time. And so you have to do things like have a space that you only work in, or, take a walk around your house or your neighborhood at the beginning and end of the day or something, to like have these little tricks to put you in work mode versus home mode. And I also was really surprised by, like, I'm a very introverted person, but I was surprised after a couple of months of working remote how much like tiny social interaction I took for granted, just like walking from the train to my office and saying hi to the same people every day and going to the same coffee shop every day. And like all of that disappeared when I worked remote. And I was really surprised at how that affected me, even as someone who considers himself like very introverted. So I had to start being really purposeful with scheduling social time into my life, or like specifically going to a gym that has classes and things like that, so that I was interacting with other people and not just like alone.
You mentioned like taking walks and stuff. Would you recommend like owning 10 acres for stuff like that?
I mean, it certainly helps to be able to just like wander out in the forest and come back, or like go do some weed whacking or something, but it's not necessary. Like when I lived in an apartment, just like living around, walking around outside, I didn't actually do that, but a friend of mine said what he does is like he goes the same way every morning, and then he walks the reverse path in the afternoon, so that it just sort of like this mental signal that work is over. And he said it works really well for him.
For those who don't know, Sam has a 10-acre lot. Have you ever walked around in your yard and found like a witch's hut or anything? Discovered that?
No, not anything like that. Mostly
obviously haven't explored
signs of wild animals that could kill us all. But
Hilarious.
That's an interesting technique to actually. I use walks in the middle of the day, so not to start or end my day, but actually to like give me a break and get my mind going again, and have that time where my mind is just processing and not on anything really specific. I let it do a little bit of wandering, but that was it.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I'm a big walker. I try to take like 1 or 2 walks a day just to clear my mind, get a little exercise in, because just sitting all day, you're like slowly dying pretty much. One other thing, I guess we're all slowly dying, but one other thing too, I know some organizations are bigger on remote than others. And there's some organizations that are kind of halfway in between, where some people work remote and some people are in an office. You get a lot of companies where they kind of look down on remote workers, or they don't value them as much as people that are coming in the office. I mean, some organizations have moved away from doing remote. So you just have to have the right culture in your organization if you are doing remote. If you're the only person working from home, that might hurt you. And also, like, career-wise, I think that sometimes remote workers get a little shafted on that. I mean, they'll look at the people that are coming into the office all day and give them the raises and bonuses, and the people that are working from remote, they may not value as much. But you just have to be in the right culture fit with your company.
I think you have to put yourself out there too. Like, you have to make, if you're remote and everyone else is in the office, like, you have to go out of your way to make those connections and talk in meetings and get those relationships going, because otherwise you'll just fall to the wayside.
It's along the lines of what I was thinking too, because a couple things came to my mind when Joe asked, what are the downsides? And I thought, well, one could be networking. If you're ever wanting to network, I think that could go both ways though, because in my job, I'm constantly, like with Joe, we're constantly meeting new people and meeting with new authors. And so I think it depends on your job. So that could be a benefit or a downfall with remote working. But if your position is one where you're not really going to be interacting a lot with other people, then I definitely think networking goes downhill. So you'd have to kind of be aware of how much communication you're going to be doing at your particular job. Another thing, though, that I felt kind of like at the beginning, like when I first started working with Thinkster, I was going in and meeting with Joe almost on a daily basis. And then as the company, kept growing and things changed, that wasn't as necessary. And so I started working more exclusively just from home. And this is totally kind of a silly thing, but I have a feeling that a lot of people can also relate to it. I started to feel a little bit out of the loop in a way. Like if I would hear about other people at the company meeting together, I'd kind of start worrying, oh, what am I missing? What did I miss there? And I certainly don't need to be in everybody else's responsibilities. That's not what I want. But at the same time, I kind of felt, just like I said, like out of the loop. So you just have to be aware of, that's going to happen a little bit. You're not going to know as much as you would in the office.
Yeah, I think the company culture really matters there. Like having an entire team have the same remote schedule and things like that, so that you don't have those situations where 2 architects who happen to be in the office chatting at coffee make a decision that the rest of the team has to deal with because they're remote, or things like that, where you're leaving people out, or not giving people the opportunity to contribute. So that's definitely a cultural thing, and trying to find companies that are like that treat remote workers as equals.
Even if you're working for a company that's all remote, like I was working at a company where we had a remote team in the US and then a remote team in Europe, and the European team had to like review our code. So we basically like submit the code, and then the next morning we'd wake up, they would have reviewed it. But then if we wanted to ask questions, we had to wait until the next day. So it's like dealing with time zones, I think, can be extremely annoying, especially when you have time zones that are more than like 5 or 6 hours apart. It's, you're spanning across 2 different work days just to talk to someone.
Yeah, I've worked at places where they require all their remote workers to be within a few time zones of their time zone. And then I've had places where they've said you had to work the same hours as the main time zone. So there's either people getting up like at 5 a.m. if they're trying to match like West Coast versus East Coast. But when you start getting people like India and Europe, yeah, time zones become an issue. I've had that same issue.
Right. What are good ways to deal with the time zone issue?
So at Auth0, we have people all over the world, basically. And there's just sort of, each team is left to sort of decide how they want to handle that. And I'm sure it varies widely, like for the people who are in DevOps versus developers versus writers and stuff. But one thing that we just assume at Auth0 is that all communication is asynchronous on Slack, unless there's like a meeting scheduled. So people generally have like working hours that they put on their Slack profile that they're available for meetings if they need to be. But there's just sort of this understanding that like Slack is not used for like necessarily real-time urgent communication, because people are working in different time zones, or maybe they have to take their kids to school or whatever. And so we just kind of give everybody the benefit of the doubt and give them like a solid 12 hours or so to respond before we follow up. And that seems to work really well, because otherwise you're kind of tied to Slack all day, every day when you're working remote. And so I think just sort of establishing communication boundaries up front within your team and within your company can have a really, really big impact.
I think too, like having an overlap hour or overlap a couple hours, when we would work with the Europeans, like there'd be 1 hour where they're on and we are on. So then you can kind of discuss things. Just makes it a little bit easier, because then you can have person-to-person communication as opposed to just like doing it over Slack. But I will say I do love the idea of Slack not being for real time, because I think one of the things, especially working remote, that bothered me is just feeling like I always had to be on Slack, because nobody could just come over to my desk. So I have to be like ready to respond. And it gets so annoying having to constantly have your phone on you or your computer on Slack.
How many of you guys in the panel have Slack on your phones that check it at all hours? I know I do sometimes.
I'm guilty.
I took it off. Like the only Slack I have on my phone is like a small group of friends, but I took my work Slack off because it just causes more trouble than good. It causes more stress. It's the same reason I took all the social media apps off my phone. Like I just don't need to be spending my time infinite scrolling through things.
A few years ago at a JavaScript conference, I was approached by Nader Dabit. And you might know him for the React Native Radio podcast. He's also a developer evangelist for Amazon. And when he came to me, we had a conversation about React Native. And the thing that I love about React Native is that it's approachable, it's web technology, and it's cross-platform. And it makes a lot of things really easy for developers to jump in and do interesting things on mobile with JavaScript. So we've had this show now running for several years, React Native Radio, where we interview people about the React Native ecosystem, some of the things that are coming out in React and how they affect mobile, and other options that you have for mobile development. So if you're doing mobile development, you're doing it in JavaScript, you're looking for a good option, or maybe you're just trying to stay current with React Native, then go check out React Native Radio at reactnativeradio.com.
So I was in a situation once where we had some developers out of Russia that were working with us. And I've worked at various other situations with developers who are way off, by time zone, not just a little bit, but like way off, like India and such. This particular case, the Russian one, man, that went the best. And one of the things that we established is kind of this strange pattern where we had some developers who would work very closely with other developers in the other team. And we ended up in this pattern of I would work on some code all day long. And when I was done, I'd check it in and I'd write this big email or document, right, of what I'd done, explaining a few things. and then let them know where it was at. And they actually took the code that I'd written and they coded on it all day long in their day. And then they did the same thing. And it was kind of this weird pseudo pairing where we'd pass the code back and forth off every day and we'd communicate to each other electronically when we didn't really have natural overlapping hours. And I think if I remember correctly, like in the morning, there was like maybe an hour where we would both be at work at the same time. So sometimes we'd get on and chat at that point, but that seemed to work out. I don't think that's a recipe of success for every situation, but instead to note that you can actually experiment a little bit and come up with some unique solutions for various types of problems. There's really easy ways. If you've never heard of a program called Loom, there's a really easy way to now like do a screen recording. So long as you have some kind of a mic and it'll record your face and it just automatically puts it up on the internet on Loom, and then you could share out the video URL. So if you had like some code you needed to explain to somebody, but you couldn't get on and actually talk to them, you could open up your screen, open up Loom, record this, and then give that to them. And then when they get around to recording it, it's a little bit closer to the scenario of you're actually sitting together and you're explaining some code or something else, right? Explaining some work that's been done or a problem, et cetera. So tools like that, if you just get to experiment a little bit, could be useful. So I want to switch the conversation a little bit here and talk specifically about learning and that aspect of your advancing your career. Talk about the benefits and drawbacks of remote work on your education and learning new technologies and learning new techniques and that sort of stuff. So what are the benefits and drawbacks of working remotely when it comes to your education?
Well, I think the biggest point, it would be that, if you're in a normal work environment, you can learn from your coworkers. Like you can go down to the desk next to you. You can ask Joe Bob, hey, can you help me with this problem? Or you can work with the back end.
How did you know that was my middle name?
Joe Bob. You can work with the people around you at any time. And that's really great for like an education wise. And I would almost recommend, I'd love to hear what the panel thinks about. A lot of people go into this field. There's a lot of web developers coming out of boot camps and a lot of people coming into this field. And a lot of them love this idea of working from remote and the flexibility of doing that. But I really say if this is your first job, don't work remote because you're going to lose a lot of that education. You're going to lose a lot of just the interaction with other people. You should probably be in an office for 2 or 3 years, or at least 1 or 2 years before you go fully remote. But I think that's one of the things I think of about education and learning.
I'd like to pipe in on that. My first 20 years in my career as a developer, I had a total of 20 jobs. Now, it wasn't exactly one per year. There was, I think, 2 jobs that lasted, one that lasted 6 and one that was 3. Then I left and I came back for another 3. So some pretty long jobs. But in general, I had a lot of jobs and therefore I had a lot of different people that I worked with. And I feel like I had a really pretty decent, first 20 years to my career. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that I actually worked with a lot of people. And a lot of the places that I worked at were part-time or sometimes full-time pairing places, right? There was a lot of collaboration. So I learned a lot of stuff from other people, the kinds of things you don't necessarily think. It wasn't just like I learned React or, C# from this person, but instead I, learned techniques for how to do this or how to do that, how to deal with problem situations, how to handle stress. I learned a lot of those sorts of things from the developers that I worked with. And being with a set of developers for a year, and then getting to be with a different set of developers for, again, on average a year, I actually got to see a lot of scenarios, a lot of things, and a lot of like ways to set up applications too. I saw a lot of different applications. So as much as that may not be always the best advice, I actually highly recommend moving around a lot. And like you said, I think there's a lot of value to be had by not working remotely, the types of things that you learn. But I will counter that with, I had one job that for a year, I paired about 75% of the time, but remotely with me and just one developer. And so that was also a pretty good situation. I kind of had all those same drawbacks of not being in the office, but I was pairing a lot. And so I did learn a lot from that one developer during that time frame. So that is definitely a drawback on your learning. If you are remote, I think that you miss out on a lot of things you can learn.
Yeah, I've loved the concept of pairing. And I did it a little bit in my last job, but I've seen a lot of developers who are like, why do we pair? Our deadlines are too busy. We don't have time to pair. But I wish I was in more organizations like that. And I guess there's really cool apps. I was just listening to a podcast the other day, like Tuple, It's like a new pairing program out there. That makes these type of things easier.
Yeah, I have to agree with you because I am the product of a boot camp. So I definitely think being in an environment where you can learn from your peers, I think is really smart. The only thing I can say for working remotely that would be an advantage, though, is that you are forced to learn to problem solve on your own. And that is one of the key skills that you need to have as a developer. So that would be the one thing I would say. You're definitely going to get a really good opportunity to learn how to problem solve without somebody just to go run down the hall and ask a question to. You've got to figure those things out on your own or learn some patience in having people get back to you. But I think that's one of the few advantages to being on your own, at least at first.
I feel like I really agree. I would say the one drawback I've found with my first remote job has been the pairing thing and the learning. There was just so much that I absorbed from my colleagues at my last job by osmosis or like through random interactions or just through architecture discussions or things like that I haven't really been able to replicate through Slack and Zoom and reading docs and things like that. Because half the time, I'd be working through some complicated issue and my senior coworker would just sort of like wander over and we could just chat for 2 or 3 minutes spontaneously and I would end up learning something from that. Whereas I think the issue is that with remote, you have to be a lot more deliberate about that. And so the inspiration doesn't always come when you're like, oh, hang on, let me try to set up a Zoom call with this person. Oh, they're out with their kid. And then by the time you can actually set something up, it's difficult. So, same with doing debugging on somebody else's machine or something, it's just not quite there yet. There's things like VS Code live share and things like that. But you have to have all that stuff set up ahead of time. Both people have to have it all set up. And so that part has been frustrating about working remote. I do really, really miss being able to learn more from people who are better than me in constant daily organic ways,
I've had a couple of organizations where they do lunch and learns. Every week someone new will go and do a little talk in front of, and they'll set up so anybody can watch as well. It's still not as, to your point, Sam, it's not as good as actually being in front of somebody and learning concepts on the fly and bumping into them in the hallway and just stopping them and asking them a question. But because it helps a little bit with those type of things.
Another thing too, if you're on your own, you have to be deliberate in looking for extra opportunities to learn. So at the office, it's going to be a lot easier to hear about a meetup or something, or, you're going to hear about all of these, what you're saying, Erik, lunch and learn. But if you're at home, it's going to be harder to hear about those opportunities than it would be, at the office. So I think you just have to search it out though. It's not too hard. Usually there's meetups.com or something that's listing out if there's events going on, but it's just harder to stay up on what kinds of events are going on if you're at home alone.
I've had a couple of people go to co-working spaces to get that type of feel when they're working remote. I've tried it. I've been in some that are just utter chaos and there's it feels like millions, but there's, tons of people squawking everywhere and you're kind of by yourself with your headphones on. And then I've seen other ones where it's not as quite as chaotic and then people come and talk to you and you can even get help if you're stuck on things if you can.
Yeah. I have a question because a couple of you were already talking about it and I know I really kind of struggle with this myself, but it's the idea of your work hours and how do you feel like for you guys, when you're working remote, do you have a tendency to work fewer hours than you would at the office, or do you feel like you overwork yourself? I'm interested to see what you all say about that.
I think I work more. I don't know about the rest.
I do too. I have definitely overworked myself, and I've had to start setting boundaries on after such and such hour. I've turned everything off. But that's me. I don't know. What does everybody else say?
Yeah, I've really struggled with that where it's, at the end of the day and I'm supposed to be done, but then I just I want to finish what I'm doing, or I don't want to do it the next morning. A lot of times, actually, what I would end up doing is I'd work like 2 extra hours at night, and then maybe I would work 2 less hours the next day, because I feel like sometimes I'd be really busy, and then other times I would just be like, have nothing to do. So I think for me, it was more like sometimes I'm working way too much, whereas sometimes I'm working like I'm barely working because there's just nothing to do. So I think it would kind of balance itself out like that. But I definitely don't think it was consistent at all. Like I didn't have like, oh, I'm working 8 hours a day. It was like work 12 hours today and then 3 hours the next day or something like that.
Yeah, I'll say that, when I work from home, I have kids and they are crazy. And so if it's a school day, when it approaches around 3 or 4 o'clock, I'm like, yep, that's a signal that I probably should stop because kids are home. So I never had that problem of like overworking ever when working from home. I could barely get it. I think if I'll maybe sometimes a little underwork, but then I'll come back and maybe work a little bit later in the day. But yeah, not so much for my style.
All right, so let's talk about environment. I want to start with the educational side of things. You're working remotely. What are some specific things you can do to combat the loss of educational opportunities that you'd get by sitting next to somebody?
We use the concept of an open office, and basically in our team, I'm gonna work on curriculum, let's say, and I drop a Zoom link and I say I'm gonna be this Zoom link, and if anybody wants to jump in, and they could jump in and out. Our program manager always has like nearly every day he drops the Zoom link. It's like, I'm gonna be here. If you have questions, come back. But again, I'm gonna go back to what Sam says. I think he nailed it in the head. We miss on the accidental learning that happens in the office. And that could be you bumping into someone, but that could be you in a whiteboard with a colleague talking about something, and someone happens to pass by him. Like I work in this huge company on the 3rd floor. It's a big building, multinational. And we would be, me and another colleague working on something, and a guy from the operations database team passed by, and he was looking at us, and he walked in and gave us incredible advice because that's all he does. He was from the team working with the databases, and he came back and gave us, like, that's an example, but that happens a lot where I may be the one passing by and I see someone talking about, I don't know, Angular or something, Angular.js, and I see them the conversation. I was like, yeah, I tried that before. Let me show you another way of doing this. And you get that accidental learning happen in the office. I haven't really found a way, because I think that the right word is, like Sam used it and Brooke used it, is deliberate. You have to be way too deliberate when you're working remotely. I haven't found a nice way of getting that same, something happens outside of what we have planned and someone can just jump in. It could be as simple as you and me were talking about a problem, and you know that someone sitting next to you or a few lanes down from you knows could help us, right? It's not as easy to just, if we're together, we could just walk together to that person, right? But in the case of this, it would mean grabbing them, making sure they come in, jump into the meeting, maybe share the screen. It's not the same. So I just don't have a nice answer to that. We just have to accept that the tooling is not there yet. I don't think it will ever be. So for now, it's just more of I know what the drawback is, and I am accepting it as part of being able to work remotely.
Right, Lewis. What did you say? There was sometimes you guys have people turn on the camera, and then they say people can join them. Is that what you said?
Yeah, we call it open office, and it's like if I'm going to be working on curriculum on an area with there's a couple of other backends, I would just drop the Zoom link and I say, hey, out here, I'm going to be open office on this Zoom working on curriculum. Anybody can jump in. And what happens is, if I'm working on the backend curriculum and someone needs changes or have ideas for that, they will jump in and say, what are you working on? And we are like socially talking about the work. It doesn't mean that I have to be always sharing my screen or someone else, but it happens more than you may think. Like I'm working on something, someone's saying, oh yeah, I saw this project. I had an idea. What are you working on? Oh, I'm working on this. Can I show you an idea? And it's related to the same thing, and I see their screen, or then I share mine, or can you share your screen? Let me see what you're doing. I can help you there. So it's kind of a casual thing that we started doing, but it works really nice, because you don't, like, you might be working on two different things, but just having someone to like bounce ideas off while doing it, it's kind of nice.
I think I remember back in the day, like this was when working remote became more and more popular and the tools were getting better and Google Hangouts just was sort of new. Like some remote workers, you had to leave your camera on the whole time. Or you would put it like a sticky note of the camera when you had to go to the bathroom or something, and you would put it back off, and you would let everybody know, like, hey, I'm working. And then, like, I know I've worked at other organizations, like, yeah, they'll have these open office hours. Yeah, and they'll just be on the camera the whole time, and anybody can jump into their channel. I was thinking, luckily that's rare nowadays, but I've heard of some companies that don't know how to do remote doing things like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the company too. Like, does the company know how to do it? Does the company know how to work with remote workers? Or are they trying to watch every move you make every day? I think that's a big part of the experience has to do with how the company handles it.
I do think, though, this is kind of a trend you see with education in general. So not just web development and working remotely, but when we're talking about learning specifically, I think, everybody's noticed that there's a lot more opportunities now than there ever have been before for you to actually get your education online. And that includes for K through 12. And there's been a lot of research and study on, is that really beneficial? Is that hurting our students? And it has been shown, yes. Like, I think, you can take your education so far. And I think, especially for millennials who have grown up with social media and this idea of interacting with people through the computer or through their phone or something, I think they're more open to it and they've been more successful with it than perhaps older generations. But there is still scientific research that's showing that when you interact with people through the computer versus in person, your learning does not stick with you as well. There is something to be said about having human contact and talking with people face to face, or learning in a classroom, like brick and mortar environment, where the learning is a lot more effective. And I think it's speaking directly to what a lot of you are pointing out. There's just those in the hallway conversations you pick up on, or, those little moments like that, those little connections. But I think it just goes deeper than that too, that we are human beings and there is this human need to interact and be with other people. And that is just part of our social nature.
I can speak to the challenge of teaching remote because that's what I do. That's my job, right? And not only as an instructor, you miss be able to use the whiteboards and things like that, reading the room by looking at people's eyes and understanding the body language and all that. But as a student, it's a lot more challenging because when you're a student, you could sit next to someone and you're struggling with a problem and you could just like look at them, or they could see you're struggling. Like there's this interaction that could happen between the students sitting next to each other. But when you're remote, you don't have that. No one is next to you. You're only looking at what's coming from the stream of the instructor. So you miss out on this, swiveling your head around and see if you can find some help. You miss out on that. So it's definitely challenging from the learning point of view. Doesn't mean that it's not going to work for you. It might work for you. But if you have the choice, and I hope this is no one from my company is listening to me, but if you have the choice of going into a classroom, you're better off doing that. I think you get more out of a teaching environment when you are brick and mortar, for sure.
Yeah, Luis, have you found you had to change the way that you teach or the way you design the curriculums because it's remote? Like, do you change the way that you're teaching?
I have in many, many ways, for sure. But we don't have it right yet. Like we continue to struggle with, not capturing the attention of students at all times. But I think the worst part of it is not being able to read the room effectively at all times. So someone can easily have their camera off and then just walk out at a crucial moment, no matter how much of a gotcha or how many little tricks we use to capture people's attention. If they're not there, it's not going to work. But if you're in a room and someone walks out and you have something really, really important that you want everybody to know, and, they walk out for a bio break, I have the ability to kind of steer the class and react to the people and how they are. In a remote environment, you're kind of going a little bit blind. So we have to have, I do a lot of polls on Slack. I do a lot of, who volunteers as tribute so that they unmute and talk to me and we walk through a problem. I do a lot of, you're running into an issue, please let me know so that I could, have you share your screen and then we show debugging techniques. Like a lot of those things happen that in the classroom you don't have to do them because you can read the classroom better. Yeah, definitely.
I have a question, Luis. How for Lambda, is all the classes online, or is any actually in person?
No, everything is online. We do all the classes online.
Okay.
Well, another advantage too that teachers have in the classroom is that you get to know your students a lot better than you would in an online environment. And so you can cater your instruction to things that interest your students in particular, but you don't really get that with an online course. You don't quite build that same kind of relationship that you would, when I was teaching, I would get to know my students well enough that I would start taking things that they enjoyed, like their personal hobbies or their interests, and I would build my lessons around those topics so that they were far more engaged and tuned into that lesson than they would be if it were just me standing up there sharing something that I'm interested in, So that's another disadvantage to trying to learn remotely. I think it's just that you're missing that contact with people and you're not building those relationships. So when you are trying to learn, you just aren't getting that personalized education that you might otherwise in person.
Another benefit of for teachers in classroom is the ruler over the knuckles. It's hard to do that remotely.
Joe knows that one very well.
Very well. That and the paddleboard.
Yes.
And also, the medium limits the art. You get a lot more of that rapport with the students because you're forced to a smaller group. If you have to teach in a classroom, like in Dev Mountain, we could not fit. Joe remembers because he taught there a few times. Even in the biggest room that we had, anything over 30 students were too crammed. So the groups were always below 30 students, never more than that. I have had groups of, over 120 students. So it's a lot harder. And in Dev Mountain, when the lecture was over, we walk out across the street and have lunch together. A group of us will go to the same place. So you have that relationship there. Because a lot of what we do is kind of facilitate, right, the learning. But when the students are not candid with us and they don't come up to us and tell us, hey, I'm struggling, they could do that sitting next to you eating a taco. And they will lean over and tell you, I'm struggling with this concept, Luis. And I could take, a piece of paper and explain it right there again as many times as we need to. But when they're in the classroom with 120 students, they feel threatened to even sometimes, stop the class and say, I don't understand that. So they go through it, and we unfortunately can't notice those. Again, we do a lot to try and do that, and we have TLs now. And this is our setting, though. No more than 8 students per TL, and we have checkpoints around the day and all that. But again, all of that is happening because we miss out on some of that goodness that we get on the classroom.
Taco Tuesday.
I like Taco Tuesday.
You like taco every day.
I do like tacos every day.
One of the biggest pain points that I find as I talk to people about software is deployment. It's really interesting to have the conversations with people where it's, I don't want to deal with Docker. I don't want to deal with Kubernetes. I don't want to deal with setting up servers. I don't, all of these different things. And in a lot of ways, DevOps has gotten a lot easier. And in a lot of ways, DevOps has also kind of embraced a certain amount of culture around applications, the way we build them, the way we deploy them. And I've really felt for a long time that developers need to have the conversations with DevOps or adopt some form of DevOps so that they can take control of what they're doing and really understand when things go to production, what's going on, so that they can help debug the issues and fix the issues and find the issues when they go wrong and help streamline things and make things better and slicker and easier so that they'll more generally go right. So we started a podcast called Adventures in DevOps. And I pulled in one of the hosts from one of my favorite DevOps shows, Nell Shamrell Harrington from the Food Fight Show. And we got things rolling there. And so this is more or less a continuation of the Food Fight Show where we're talking about the things that go into DevOps. So if you're struggling with any of these operational type things, then definitely check out Adventures in DevOps. And you can find it at adventuresindevopspodcast.com.
All right. I think that's probably a reasonable place for us to look to wrapping up here. This has been a pretty interesting conversation, so I really like today's episode. So let's go through the panel, and I don't know if you're familiar with kind of picks, but we tend to do a little bit variation on that. So have everybody say one tool or tip that they found is effective for remote working, whether that's a piece of software, some kind of a communication tool, their favorite screen sharing program, whatever, something like that. And then if you have anything else you want to mention while you're at it, then go ahead. So anybody want to volunteer to go first?
I can go first. If you're looking for a remote job, there's a really good website called We Work Remotely. It's actually how I got my first remote job. And it's just a very simple place. They just, companies post ads for, it's all remote jobs. It's all very flexible. And it's constantly updated. So if you're looking for a remote job, We Work Remotely is a great website.
I'll go next. Visual Studio Live Share. You can use it across Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. It's getting better and better every day, so give it a try. Visual Studio Live Share.
I'll say one thing that has helped us at work is the Slack integration with Zoom. So you can just do /Zoom and it will generate a call for you and you can just hop on. That's a really useful thing to be able to do spontaneously.
For $23 billion, they better have some cool stuff in Slack.
I kind of mentioned this before, but there's a kind of a new app by Ben Ornstein called Tuple. It's a really good pair programming app. So I think that's perfect for this type of situation. Right now, you have to put your email in and they send you invite, but they should be completely public. So you can sign up directly on their website soon. And that's Tuple, that app. He also does a really good podcast too, the Art of Product podcast.
Was it Tuple or Tuple?
I think it's pronounced Tuple, TUPLE.app.
All right, I want to point out StackBlitz for working remotely because for various reasons, I actually just gave a talk last Friday on using StackBlitz as your IDE and give a bunch of tips and tricks for when you're using StackBlitz. But being forced to take using it as a way to share out problems and have somebody help you with a problem, being forced to boil down that problem into something that can fit into a StackBlitz project and share it out, and just all of its integrations with GitHub and a lot of its other features. It's just a really good app for getting other people to help you out with something or coordinating with other people. It's not the same thing as actual live share. You can't both work on something, but instead it allows you to have something and either you yourself create forks of it and play around with it, or give it out and let other people create forks and play around with what you've built. So StackBlitz.
And don't they send your code to space too?
You can deploy your code. If you sign up for their subscription, then you can get your code sent literally to space on a web server in space. The only web server running truly in space. You can have your code up there. Pretty cool stuff.
So I'm going to share the one that you mentioned earlier, Joe, the loom.com, not Zoom, but Loom with an L, because we have found value with that at Thinkster, where we've had to record some just quick, screen capture video. And I think it's nice because if you're ever needing to teach somebody just how to problem solve through some kind of coding barrier or challenge or whatever, you can just record it real quick, send it off to them. They can watch that and then they can refer back to it too. So that's nice. It's always there for a quick reference to go back to.
Is that everybody? Did we get everyone? Nobody got skipped? All right. Thanks everybody for coming to the panel. Thanks everybody for listening. And we will be back with our next episode sometime soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.